Christmas extravaganza. If you are new to our extravaganza, you should know that day 1 and day 2 audio awaits you in the same place that you found this. And there will be another 9 days of audio coming your way, all the way up until Christmas Eve, where we will end with a couple things plus 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. And if you're a new listener, one of the things that happens on the show is I give background information, context, history, that kind of stuff, and then we listen to audio, like an annotated audiobook. So today, what I have to tell you isn't so much about the stories and the poems we're going to listen to, but it's about the people who wrote them. Because at least one of them I thought I knew, and then when I was researching more and more, I found out not so much. And the other author is completely new to me. So, first is Paul Laurence Dunbar. You may have heard Paul Laurence Dunbar's rather famous poem, We Wear the Mask, and it's beautiful. And he is an extraordinary writer, and he was recognized as such during his time. But his mother was widowed, he didn't have a lot of money, he didn't have enough money to go to college, and so he worked as an elevator operator. However, he found that to be rather useful because when he wasn't operating the elevator, he could sit there and write poetry. So he was able to use his time efficiently enough to self-publish a book of poems called Oak and the Ivy. He self-published that with the help of Orville Wright, who he had worked with in high school on a high school magazine that was designed for, aimed at, the African-American students at the school. Right? That Orville Wright. I know, I had no idea. So he continued that kind of magnetism in his life. He just attracted really famous people of his day. He got to tour England. He toured around the northeastern part of the country, speaking, reading his poetry. He was very popular. The thing that's a little uncomfortable about all of that is that it wasn't poems like We Wear the Mask, necessarily, that made him famous. That certainly got him the acclaim from experts. What made him famous was his poetry where he used dialect. He was born in Kentucky in 1872, so he's post-Civil War, but that doesn't mean that things were going particularly well. He did manage to get to Ohio, which helped some, and actually, I guess more than some, because at his high school, he was the president of the high school's literary society and the newspaper editor for his school. And his very first poem was published when he was 16 in the Dayton newspaper. He grew up after the 40 Acres and a Mule debacle. Reconstruction was a failure. So he's past that, but he's still observing these dynamics, these splits in society in the United States. And Frederick Douglass particularly felt that Dunbar's writing was important and thoughtful and accurate. So since I had no idea that Paul Laurence Dunbar even wrote in dialect, I'm going to play you a few different poems scattered throughout today. The first poem you're going to listen to is in dialect. The second is a more formal poem. Then we'll listen to his short story, An Old Time Christmas, which goes in and out of dialect. We'll go back to another dialect poem, and then we'll go on to a completely different author, Mary Eleanor Wilkins Freeman, and a short story she wrote called Jimmy Scarecrow's Christmas. And then we will end with one of Dunbar's more formal poems, which I think ends it on a good note for today. So that's Dunbar. Now, Mary E. Wilkins Freeman, she was a New Englander. She was born in Massachusetts, and then they went, her family eventually moved up to Brattleboro, Vermont. She stayed in that New England area her entire life. She went to Mount Holyoke back when it was the female seminary and stayed in and around that area for most of her life, going down into New York and New Jersey for a little while as well. Her husband was 7 years younger than she was. They did not have a particularly happy marriage, it seems, because when he died suddenly before her, he left most of his money to his chauffeur and $1 to his former wife. But they had gotten divorced, obviously. However, I had never heard of Mary Eleanor Wilkins Freeman, and I can't figure out how I missed her. She was a prolific writer during her time. She worked as a secretary for Oliver Wendell Holmes for a while. She was very well reviewed, and she kind of caught this wave. She was born in 1852 and died in the 30s. And during the time that she was writing, spiritualism started to, right around the turn of the century and into the 20th century, spiritualism kind of caught fire. And she wound up doing a really interesting job of weaving magical parts in with just regular old stuff. And in fact, today's story is an excellent example of that. So I hope today you enjoy these two authors. They are surprises to me. Dunbar I had only known from a few poems of his, and now I have a whole different picture of him in my mind. And Mary Eleanor Wilkins Freeman, who I think we're probably going to have to take a look at on CraftLit at some point, but not until we finish The Count of Monte Cristo. And that begins January 2016. All right, here we go with Paul Laurence Dunbar. We're starting off with one of his dialect poems, and then we'll go in and out of all of those and his stories as we listen. Here we go.
Christmas by Paul Laurence Dunbar. Read by Douglas Nathaniel Williams. Step with the banjo and glide with the fiddle. This ain't no time for the potter and piddle, for Christmas is coming, it's right on the way, and it's ours to dance for the break of the day. What if the wind is tearing, whistling? Look at that fire, how it's spitting and bristling. Heating the ashes and heating the cinders. Old Mr. Frost can just look through these windows. Heat up the toddy and pass the warm glasses. Don't stop to shiver at blowings and blasts. Keep on the kittle and keep it a-humming. Eat all and drink all, there's lots a-coming. Look here, Maria. Don't open that oven. You want all these people a-pushing and shoving? Rest from the dance? Yes, you done cotch that odor. Mammy done cotched it, and Lord, it nigh flowed her. Possum is monstrous for making folks find it. Come, draw up your cheers. I do mind it. Eat up them critters, you men folks and womens. Possums ain't scarce when there's lots of persimmons.
Christmas Carol by Paul Laurence Dunbar. Ring out, ye bells, all nature swells with gladness at the wondrous story. The world was lorn, but Christ is born to change our sadness into glory. Sing, earthlings, sing, tonight a King hath come from heaven's high throne to bless us. The outstretched hand o'er all the land is raised in pity to caress us. Come at his call, be joyful all, away with mourning and with sadness. The heavenly choir, with holy fire, their voices raise in songs of gladness. The darkness breaks, and dawn awakes, her cheeks suffused with youthful blushes. The rocks and stones in holy tones are singing sweeter than the rushes. Then why should we in silence be, when nature lends her voice to praises? When heaven and earth proclaim the truth of him for whom that lone star blazes? No, be not still, but with a will strike all your harps and set them ringing. On hill and heath let every breath throw all its power into singing. End of Christmas Carol by Paul Laurence Dunbar. Recording by Ravenotation.
An Old-Time Christmas, from The Strength of Gideon and Other Stories by Paul Laurence Dunbar. Read by Alan Davis Drake. An Old-Time Christmas. When the holidays came round, the thoughts of Liza Ann Lewis always turned to the good times that she used to have at home, when, following the precedent of antebellum days, Christmas lasted all the week and good cheer held sway. She remembered with regret the gifts that were given, the songs that were sung to the tinkling of the banjo and the dances with which they beguiled the night hours, and the eating. Could she forget it? The great turkey with the fat literally bursting from him, the yellow yam melting into deliciousness in the mouth, or at some more fortunate season, even the juicy possum grinning in brown and greasy death from the great platter. In the 10 years she had lived in New York, she had known no such feast day. Food was strangely dear in the metropolis, and then there was always the weekly rental of the poor room to be paid. But she had kept the memory of the old times green in her heart, and ever turned to it with the fondness of one for something irretrievably lost. That is how Jimmy came to know about it. Jimmy was 13 and small for his age, and he could not remember any such times as his mother told him about, although he said with great pride to his partner and rival, Blinky Scott, "Geez, Blink, you ought to hear my old lady talk about the days they had down where we come from at Christmas. New York ain't in it with them. You can just bet." And Blinky, who was a New Yorker clean through, with a New Yorker's contempt for anything outside of the city, had promptly replied with a downward spreading of his right hand, "Ah, forget it." Jimmy felt a little crestfallen for a minute, but he lifted himself in his own estimation by threatening to do Blinky, and the cloud rolled by. Liza Ann knew that Jimmy couldn't ever understand what she meant by an old-time Christmas unless she could show him by some faint approach to its merrymaking, and it had been the dream of her life to do this. But every year she had failed, until now she was a little ahead. Her plan was too good to keep, and when Jimmy went out that Christmas Eve morning to sell his papers, she had disclosed it to him, and bade him hurry home as soon as he was done, for they were to have a real old-time Christmas. Jimmy exhibited as much pleasure as he deemed consistent with his dignity, and promised to be back early to add his earnings to the fund for celebration. When he was gone, Liza Ann counted over her savings lovingly, and dreamed of what she could buy her boy, and what she would have for dinner the next day. Then a voice, a colored man's voice, she knew, floated up to her. Someone in the alley below her window was singing "The Old Folks at Home." All up and down the whole creation, sadly I roam, still longing for the old plantation and for the old folks at home. She leaned out of the window and listened, and when the song had ceased and she drew her head in again, there were tears in her eyes, the tears of memory and longing. But she crushed them away and laughed tremendously to herself as she said, "What a regular old fool I'm a-getting to be." Then she went out into the cold, snow-covered streets, for she had work to do that day that would add a mite to her little Christmas store. Down in the street, Jimmy was calling out the morning papers and racing with Blinky Scott for prospective customers. These were only transients, of course, for each had his regular buyers whose preferences were scrupulously respected by both, in agreement with a strange silent compact. The electric cars went clanging to and fro. The streets were full of shoppers with bundles and bunches of holly, and all the sights and sounds were pregnant with the message of the joyous time. People were full of the holiday spirit. The papers were going fast, and the little colored boy's pockets were filled with the desired coins. It would have been all right with Jimmy if the policeman hadn't come up on him just as he was about to toss the bones, and when Blinky Scott had him faded to the amount of 5 hard-earned pennies. Well, they were trying to suppress youthful gambling in New York, and the officer had to do his duty. The others scuttled away. But Jimmy was so absorbed in the game that he didn't see the cop, until he was right above him. So he was pinched. He blubbered a little and wiped his grimy face with his grimier sleeve until it was one long brown smear. You know, this was Jimmy's first time. The big bluecoat looked a little bit ashamed as he marched him down the street, followed at a distance by a few hooting boys. Some of the holiday shoppers turned to look at them as they passed and murmured, "Poor little chap, I wonder what he's been up to now." Others said sarcastically, "It seems strange that copper didn't call for help." A few of his brother officers grinned at him as he passed, and he blushed. But the dignity of the law must be upheld, and the crime of gambling among the newsboys was a growing evil. Yes, the dignity of the law must be upheld, and though Jimmy was only a small boy, it would be well to make an example of him. So his name and age were put down on the blotter, and over against them the offense with which he was charged. Then he was locked up to await trial the next morning. "It's shameful," the bearded sergeant said, "how the kids are carrying on these days. People are feeling pretty generous, and they'll toss 'em a nickel or a dime for the paper and tell 'em to keep the change for Christmas. And first thing you know, the little beggars are shooting craps or pitching pennies. We've got to make an example of some of 'em." Liza Ann Lewis was tearing through her work that day to get home and do her Christmas shopping, and she was singing as she worked some such old song as she used to sing in the good old days back home. She reached her room late and tired, but happy. Visions of a wakening up time for her and Jimmy were on her mind, but Jimmy wasn't there. "I wonder what that little scamp is," she said, smiling. "I told him to hurry home, but I reckon he's staying out later with the evening papers so as to bring home more money." Hour after hour passed, and he did not come, and then she grew alarmed. At 2 o'clock in the morning she could stand it no longer, and she went over and awakened Blinky Scott, much to the young gentleman's disgust, who couldn't see why any woman need make such a fuss about a kid. He told her laconically that Jimmy was pinched for throwing the bones. She heard with a sinking heart, and went home to her own room to walk the floor all night and sob. In the morning, with all her Christmas savings tied up in a handkerchief, she hurried down to Jefferson Market courtroom. There was a full blotter that morning, and the judge was rushing through it. He wanted to get home to his Christmas dinner, but he paused long enough when he got to Jimmy's case to deliver a brief but stern lecture upon the evil of child gambling in New York. He said that as it was Christmas Day, he would like to release the prisoner with a reprimand, but he thought that this had been done too often and that it was high time to make an example of one of the offenders. Well, it was fine or imprisonment. Liza Ann struggled up through the crowd of spectators, and her Christmas treasure, added to what Jimmy had, paid his fine, and they went out of the courtroom together. When they were in the room again, she put the boy to bed, for there was no fire and no coal to make one. Then she wrapped herself in a shabby shawl and sat huddled up over the empty stove. Down in the alley she heard the voice of the day before singing, "Oh, darkies, how my heart grows weary, far from the old folks at home." And she burst into tears. End of An Old-Time Christmas.
Speaking of Christmas by Paul Laurence Dunbar. Read by Nathaniel Williams. Breezes blowing middling brisk, snowflakes through the air a whisk, pulling kinda soft and light. Not enough to make things white, but it's sorta sifting down so as to cover up the brown of the dark world's rugged ways and make things look like holidays. Not smooth over but just speckled, sort of straining for effect, and not quite getting through what it started in to do. Mercy sakes, it does seem queer. Christmas Day is most nigh here. Somehow, it don't seem to me Christmas like it used to be. Christmas with its ice and snow, Christmas of the long ago. You could feel it stir and hum weeks and weeks before it come. Something in the atmosphere told you when the day was near. Didn't need no almanacs, that was just one of nature's facts. Every cottage decked out gay, cedar wreaths and holly spray. And the stores, how they were dressed, tinsel till you couldn't rest. Every window fixed up packed candy canes and things like that. Noah's arks and guns and dolls and all kinds of falderalls. Then with the frosty bells a chime, sliding down the hills of time, right amidst the fun and din, Christmas come a bustling in. Raised his cheery voice a call out a welcome to us all. Hale and hearty, strong and bluff, that was Christmas sure enough. Snow knee-deep and coasting fine. Frozen mill ponds all a-shine, seeming just to lay in wake, begging you to come and skate. And you'd get your gal and go, stumping cheerily through the snow, feeling pleased and skeert and warm, 'cause she had to hold your arm. Why, when Christmas come in, we spent the whole glad day in glee, having fun and feasting high, and some courting on the sly. Busting in some neighbor's door, and then suddenly, before he could give his voice a lift, yelling at him, "Christmas gift!" Now, such things are never heard. Merry Christmas is the word, but it's only change a name and means given just the same. There's too many new style ways now about the holidays. I'd just like once more to see Christmas like it used to be.
Fireside Christmas Short Stories. Jimmy Scarecrow's Christmas by Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. Recorded by Laura Armentrout. Jimmy Scarecrow led a sad life in the winter. Jimmy's greatest grief was his lack of occupation. He liked to be useful, and in winter he was absolutely of no use at all. He wondered how many such miserable winters he would have to endure. He was a young scarecrow, and this was his first one. He was strongly made, and although his wooden joints creaked a little when the wind blew, he did not grow in the least rickety. Every morning when the wintry sun peered like a hard yellow eye across the dry corn stubble, Jimmy felt sad. But at Christmas time, his heart nearly broke. On Christmas Eve, Santa Claus came in his sledge, heaped high with presents, urging his team of reindeer across the field. He was on his way to the farmhouse where Betsy lived with her Aunt Hannah. Betsy was a very good little girl with very smooth yellow curls, and she had a great many presents. Santa Claus had a large wax doll baby for her on his arm, tucked up against the fur collar of his coat. He was afraid to trust it in the pack, lest it get broken. When poor Jimmy Scarecrow saw Santa Claus, his heart gave a great leap. "Santa Claus, here I am," he cried out. But Santa Claus did not hear him. "Santa Claus, please give me a little present. I was good all summer and kept the crows out of the corn," pleaded the poor Scarecrow in his choking voice. But Santa Claus passed by with a merry "Hello!" and a great clamor of bells. Then Jimmy Scarecrow stood in the corn stubble and shook with sobs until his joints creaked. "I am of no use in the world, and everybody has forgotten me," he moaned. But he was mistaken. The next morning, Betsy sat at the window, holding her Christmas doll baby, and she looked out at Jimmy Scarecrow standing alone in the field amidst the corn stubble. "Aunt Hannah?" said she. Aunt Hannah was making a crazy patchwork quilt, and she frowned hard at a triangular piece of red silk and a circular piece of pink, wondering how to fit them together. "Well," said she, "did Santa Claus bring the Scarecrow any Christmas present?" "No, of course he didn't." "Why not?" "Because he's a scarecrow. Don't ask silly questions." "I wouldn't like to be treated so if I was a scarecrow," said Betsy. But her Aunt Hannah did not hear her. She was busy cutting a triangular snip out of the round piece of pink silk so the piece of red silk could be feather-stitched into it. It was snowing hard out of doors, and the north wind blew. The Scarecrow's poor old coat got whiter and whiter with snow. Sometimes he almost vanished in the thick white storm. Aunt Hannah worked until the middle of the afternoon on her crazy quilt. Then she got up and spread it out over the sofa with an air of pride. "There," said she, "that's done, and that makes the 8th. I've got one for every bed in the house, and I've given 4 away. I'd give this away if I knew of anybody that wanted it." Aunt Hannah put on her hood and shawl, and drew some blue yarn stockings on over her shoes, and set out through the snow to carry a slice of plum pudding to her sister Susan, who lived down the road. Half an hour after Aunt Hannah had gone, Betsy put her little red plaid shawl over her head and ran across the field to Jimmy Scarecrow. She carried her new doll baby smuggled up under her shawl. "Wish you Merry Christmas," she said to Jimmy Scarecrow. "Wish you the same," said Jimmy, but his voice was choked with sobs and was also muffled, for his old hat had slipped down to his chin. Betsy looked pitifully at the old hat fringed with icicles like frozen tears, and the old snow-laden coat. "I've brought you a Christmas present," said she, and with that she tucked her doll baby inside Jimmy Scarecrow's coat, sticking its tiny feet into a pocket. "Thank you," said Jimmy Scarecrow faintly. "You're welcome," said she. "Keep her under your overcoat so the snow won't wet her, and she won't catch cold. She's delicate." "Yes, I will," said Jimmy Scarecrow, and he tried hard to bring one of his stiff, outstretched arms around to clasp the doll baby. "Don't you feel cold in that old summer coat?" asked Betsy. "If I had a little exercise, I should be warm," he replied. But he shivered, and the wind whistled through his rags. "You wait a minute," said Betsy, and was off across the field. Jimmy Scarecrow stood in the corn stubble with the doll baby under his coat and waited, and soon Betsy was back again, with Aunt Hannah's crazy quilt trailing in the snow behind her. "Here," said she, "here is something to keep you warm," and she folded the crazy quilt around the Scarecrow and pinned it. "Aunt Hannah wants to give it away if anybody wants it," she explained. "She's got so many crazy quilts in the house now, she doesn't know what to do with them. Goodbye. Be sure you keep the doll baby covered up." And with that she ran across the field and left Jimmy Scarecrow alone with the crazy quilt and the doll baby. The bright flash of colors under Jimmy's hat brim dazzled his eyes, and he felt a little alarmed. "I hope this quilt is harmless, if it is crazy," he said. But the quilt was warm, and he dismissed his fears. Soon the doll baby whimpered, but he creaked his joints a little, and that amused it, and he heard it cooing inside his coat. Jimmy Scarecrow had never felt so happy in his life as he did for an hour or so. But after that the snow began to turn to rain, and the crazy quilt was soaked through and through. And not only that, but his coat and the poor doll baby. It cried pitifully for a while, and then it was still, and he was afraid it was dead. It grew very dark, and the rain fell in sheets. The snow melted, and Jimmy Scarecrow stood halfway up his old boots in water. He was saying to himself that the saddest hour of his life had come, when suddenly he again heard Santa Claus's sleigh bells and his merry voice talking to his reindeer. It was after midnight. Christmas was over, and Santa was hastening home to the North Pole. "Santa Claus! Dear Santa Claus!" cried Jimmy Scarecrow with a great sob, and that time Santa Claus heard him and drew rein. "Who's there?" he shouted out of the darkness. "It's only me," replied the Scarecrow. "Who's me?" shouted Santa Claus. "Jimmy Scarecrow." Santa got out of his sledge and waded up. "Have you been standing here ever since corn was ripe?" he asked pityingly. And Jimmy replied that he had. "What's that over your shoulders?" Santa Claus continued, holding up his lantern. "It's a crazy quilt." "And what are you holding under your coat?" "The doll baby that Betsy gave me, and I'm afraid it's dead," poor Jimmy Scarecrow sobbed. "Nonsense!" cried Santa Claus. "Let me see it." And with that he pulled the doll baby out from under the Scarecrow's coat and patted its back and shook it a little, and it began to cry and then to crow. "It's all right," said Santa Claus. "This is the doll baby I gave Betsy, and it is not at all delicate. It went through the measles, and the chicken pox, and the mumps, and the whooping cough before it left the North Pole. Now get into the sledge, Jimmy Scarecrow, and bring the doll baby and the crazy quilt. I've never had any quilts that weren't in their right minds at the North Pole, but maybe I can cure this one. Get in!" Santa chirruped to his reindeer, and they drew the sledge up close in a beautiful curve. "Get in, Jimmy Scarecrow, and come with me to the North Pole," he cried. "Please, how long shall I stay?" asked Jimmy Scarecrow. "Why, you're going to live with me," replied Santa Claus. "I've been looking for a person like you for a long time." "Are there any crows to scare away at the North Pole? I want to be useful," Jimmy Scarecrow said anxiously. "No," answered Santa Claus, "but I don't want you to scare away crows. I want you to scare away Arctic explorers. I can keep you in work for 1,000 years, and scaring away Arctic explorers from the North Pole is much more important than scaring away crows from corn. Why, if they found the pole, there wouldn't be a piece an inch long left in a week's time, and the earth would cave in like an apple without a core. They would whittle it all to pieces, and carry it away in their pockets for souvenirs. Come along. I am in a hurry. I will go on 2 conditions, said Jimmy. First, I want to make a present to Aunt Hannah and Betsy next Christmas. You shall make them any present you choose. What else? I want some way provided to scare the crows out of the corn next summer while I am away, said Jimmy. That is easily managed, said Santa Claus. Just wait a minute. Santa took his stylographic pen out of his pocket, went with his lantern close to one of the fence posts, and wrote these words upon it: Notice to crows. Whichever crow shall hereafter hop, fly, or flop into this field during the absence of Jimmy Scarecrow, and therefrom purloin, steal, or abstract corn, shall be instantly, in a twinkling and a trice, turned snow white, and be ever after a disgrace, a byword, and a reproach to his whole race. Per order of Santa Claus. The corn will be safe now, said Santa Claus. Get in! Jimmy got into the sledge, and they flew away over the fields out of sight with merry halloos and a great clamor of bells. The next morning there was much surprise at the farmhouse when Aunt Hannah and Betsy looked out of the window, and the Scarecrow was not in the field, holding out his stiff arms over the corn stubble. Betsy had told Aunt Hannah she had given away the crazy quilt and the doll baby, but had been scolded very little. You must not give away anything of yours again without asking permission, said Aunt Hannah. And you have no right to give anything of mine, even if you know I don't want it. Now both my pretty quilt and your beautiful doll baby are spoiled. That was all Aunt Hannah had said. She thought she would send John after the quilt and the doll baby next morning, as soon as it was light. But Jimmy Scarecrow was gone, and the crazy quilt and the doll baby with him. John, the servant man, searched everywhere, but not a trace of them could he find. They must have all blown away, Mum, he said to Aunt Hannah. We shall have to have another Scarecrow next summer, said she. But the next summer there was no need of a Scarecrow, for not a crow came past the fence post on which Santa Claus had written his notice to crows. The cornfield was never so beautiful, and not a single grain was stolen by a crow, and everybody wondered at it, for they could not read the crow language in which Santa had written. It is a great mystery to me why the crows don't come into our cornfield when there is no Scarecrow, said Aunt Hannah. But she had a still greater mystery to solve when Christmas came round again. Then she and Betsy had each a strange present. They found them in the sitting room on Christmas morning. Aunt Hannah's present was her old crazy quilt, remodeled, with every piece cut square and true, and matched exactly to its neighbor. Why, it's my old crazy quilt! But it isn't crazy now, cried Aunt Hannah, and her very spectacles seemed to glisten with amazement. Betsy's present was her doll baby of the Christmas before, but the doll was a year older. She had grown an inch, and could walk, and say, Mama, and How do? She was changed a good deal, but Betsy knew her at once. "It's my doll baby," she cried, and snatched her up and kissed her. But neither Aunt Hannah nor Betsy ever knew that the quilt and the doll were Jimmy Scarecrow's Christmas presents to them. End of Jimmy Scarecrow's Christmas by Mary E. Wilkins Freeman.
Christmas in the Heart by Laurence Dunbar. Read by Nathaniel Williams. The snow lies deep upon the ground, and winter's brightness all around decks bravely out the forest sere with jewels of the brave old year. The coasting crowd upon the hill with some new spirit seems to thrill, and all the temple bells that chime ring out the glee of Christmas time. In happy homes the brown oak bough vies with the red-gemmed holly now, and here and there like pearls there show the berries of the mistletoe. A sprig upon the chandelier says to the maidens, "Come not here." Even the pauper of the earth some kindly gift has cheered to mirth. Within his chamber, dim and cold, there sits a grasping miser old. He has no thought save one of gain, to grind and gather and grasp and drain. A peal of bells, a merry shout assails his ear, gazes out upon a world to him all gray, and snarls, "Why, this is Christmas Day." No man of ice, for shame, for Christmas Day is no mere name. No, not for you this ringing cheer, this festal season of the year, and not for you the chime of bells from holy temple rolls and swells. In day and deed he has no part who holds not Christmas in his heart.